make it stay, make it strong. From barriers to breakthrough, we stand with pride and birth. Sedulous collective, we by your side always.
Now, we're going to turn the tables over to you, the audience. You've been so patiently listening on the topics that have been presented. Do we have microphones? Yes. We've got Ruby with the microphone ready to take your questions or comments, suggestions.
Don't all shout at once.
Anything from the front row? Front row. Tradition.
Hello there. Thanks very much, and thank you all very much for your presentations. I really just want to agree with all of what was said, but specifically some, what I've forgotten your name, you said. It is true. People are really tired of being asked to participate in surveys, studies, workshops, and nothing comes out of it. I'm 74, and this has been historic. And so for the younger generation to stand up, in my opinion, and demand that real change, and will support your actions on that, because this has been everlasting and we're tired of it.
So I lost my voice a little bit. I'm not sick, but thank you. Really insightful slides. Patrick worked with Islington Council within service improvement and involvement. So from one of those organisations that are trying to do a good thing, but it's of course very messy and very long, very hard. I don't want to make it too cool, but generally speaking, when you've seen it work really well, and I guess it's a question for the panel in general, what would you say is the key things that are there in place? And then obviously not thinking about the incentive side of things, but would you say it's more so, is it one particular person that they've built a relationship with? Is it, of course, actual meaningful outcomes? What have you seen work really well? And I guess what suggestion would you give the local authority like Islington? Of course, I don't have the money to give you right now, but it's out of interest.
I'll take a free meal.
Can I answer quickly and then just because I've just finished training a local council, a local authority, community engagement officers in how to do participatory research with communities, how to engage them and how to apply some of the methods and stuff. And that was a really fantastic experience. They were really keen to do it, but do it properly. And I found that the more we kind of talked and stuff, what I'd prepared, I designed this course for them. They obviously paid the institution, and I was the person to deliver it. It didn't quite fit with the limits of their roles. So, one example was, okay, so if I go to a resident's house, for example, to invite them to take part in this, but I see that there's more people living there than there should be, and my role is to report, to report these things as part of my job. Which hat do I wear? Am I the participatory researcher, or am I the community engagement officer that has to enforce? And these are really valid and important questions for them to be asking. So that's just an example where it's like these approaches are being parachuted into these organisations that already have very clear policies, already very clear regulations of what needs to be done, what can be done, what can't be done. And so I think there's an honesty that needs to be there with the people that are doing this, so that the expectations are realistic and they're not, deceived in any way or feel like they're being deceived. I think one of the key ingredients for me, I think, is that honesty and transparency about the limitations, because I think the focus tends to be on what is possible. This is what, we've got to create change, we want to empower, and it sounds great, and that is always the aim. But okay, within this context, as a local authority, these are the things that we that we can't do or can't overlook. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's my take on
That's
this.
blue sky thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that parachuting something with obviously its own history, its own commitments, its own underlying principles into something that already is very kind of fixed. And so it's working out how can we adapt it so that it works within this context. Yeah, I hope that answers.
I'll just jump in quickly to follow on. I would say that I think maybe institutions are trying to do the wrong thing in trying to be the ones who are like, how do we do participatory research or whatever, when actually what they should be doing is supporting grassroots institutions, supporting institutions like Sedulous, and kind of letting go a bit. So it's a hard thing to let go of the resource and the control and help to build the infrastructure. They're possibly really not the ones to be doing it.
Agree.
Yeah.
I can build on that to give you kind of a couple of practical examples. As a council, you're always going to have the legacy of being a council and what that means for people's various experiences of working in a council. So as part of the Shifting the Power Partnership that I mentioned, we worked with Clearview Research to develop the Think Fund, and for those who know, that's a £400,000 evolved fund between Brixton and Peckham, both areas getting £200,000 each. And the thing that's worked really well with that is the sheer level of intention at each level of how you're making that participatory. So it went all the way back to kind of postcode lottery, 4,000 letters through letterboxes as to which people would like to be on the community advisory board. We were then going to set the parameters for what the fund was going to make decisions on. That then went out to a public call out. The public then were sent through to the community advisory board. They shortlisted about 250 applicants. That then went back out to the public to vote on where that money should go. So at every single stage, you're getting like really clear levels of participation, and it comes with agency and meaning, because ultimately the people are going to decide where that money is spent. So you can kind of you would struggle to do that as a council because you might not have the trust that, to Erel's point, other organisations do. So work out who you can partner with to be able to do that sort of work.
Thank you.
Good evening. This is a question for Anne. I've enjoyed and listened quite carefully to each of your delivery. And so, coming from participating in research, looking at, in particularly, employment, mental health, and education, I find that, I know you mentioned about being neurodiverse, and I'm looking at mental health, neurodiversity, employment, how the system and the legal system for, in particular, minors, and how they are represented or not, how their research on them is triggered and personal, and particular to certain communities, and how the relevance of it going through the system in order to get help, assistance, based on the research that week is presenting itself, and how long it takes to roll out. Where can communities go to if you want them to participate, to actually trust what the research is saying? Because that trust of whether or not I've come out now, I've participated, you've taken all of my personal details and everything else, is that going to truly help me, assist me, or go against me? And am I going to get the assistance from the research that it presents itself for me in?
I don't think I have a clean answer for you. To be perfectly honest, I think it's a great question. What I would say, and one of the things I guess I'm hopeful of, but it's a great test case actually for whether this participation is done well, is the new neighbourhood plan for the NHS, for example, where healthcare has been taken back into communities. Now, if that is done well, and that is to points that have been made by other panellists, of like grassroots community-led organisations, maybe that work with neurodiverse people and minors that have a great understanding on the front line of these are the needs of these individuals, and we know how to support them better than anyone. That could work really well as a preventative and as a kind of system response. The worry would be that if it's not done well, and it's people who are parachuted in with clinical backgrounds to kind of say, this is what we think this community needs, then we have a risk of ending up in the same place. So I think the signal in that is really hopeful in my mind. It just needs to be done with the same level of care that it should be. So not really a silver bullet for you, I'm afraid, but yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question.
I'm moved and heartened by what you're saying. Partly you can see I've lived a long time, so I've lived with these experiences for a very long time. I'm also really engaged in how we do it differently. And when I say do it differently, I mean how do we be together in a completely different way? How do we genuinely enable people to have agency? And when I look at how we are trained, learned, schooled to believe in regulations and other people having power, there's a bit of me that's, a combination of fed up with it, but also in pain about it. But then how do we, when we're actually genuinely, how do we use systems and in order to enable people to genuinely feel empowered, having agency, and being listened to, and generally feel that they have the power to do something, even if they just say something about it in that way. And at the moment what I'm looking at is how do we have agreements? And I'm looking, for instance, that Sedulous is a CIC, and I know that most funders want to have funding organised by CICs, but actually that once again is fitting into the old regulations and legal design. When how do we have agreements which we can change? Because things are changing, and they're going to change a lot very quickly. I'm really grateful for what you're doing, and I really hope there's some way in which we can change the way in which we be together at the moment. The way I talk about it is commoning, because I'm interested in commoning and how we develop commons, which is, it's more than just a community. It's the community saying, no, you need to listen to us. We need to learn, we need to rewire ourselves actually. We need to learn how we can explain to you in ways in which doesn't fit your systems, but we create our own systems. I don't know where to go with it, how to work with it, where to be with it, but I'm hoping. Thank you.
Speak to
Yeah. I can speak. Thank you, by the way. Thank you for what you were saying. Two things come to mind. So, in this country, so I mentioned community organising earlier. I'm very, very new to community organising, but I have realised that it's something that is not well known or well used as a tool in this country. And I do think that it's something that just needs to expand. So I think more and more like funders are understanding that we need to build community power. We need to be organised, and when we're organised, we'll be too big and powerful to ignore. But then we have the resource issue. It's not work that is very well resourced. It could be effective, but it doesn't demonstrate the sorts of outcomes that funders would usually be looking at. And in our work in How to Prosper, I think we've been thinking more and more about how to self-resource and how to look at models from different parts of the world where we do the organising and we resource ourselves. Because then we're not dependent on anyone. Like whoever resources you is the one who controls you really. Yeah. So until we kind of learn these things, so I guess buying more ordinary people buying into the organising kind of concept and framework, and then learning how to organise resources and money among ourselves. And as we grow, then we will become more powerful, and we won't be able to be ignored. But I'm not that interested in existing systems. Sorry.
Do keep an eye out for the Brixton Commons, which is there's some early thinking about potentially setting up a common structure in Brixton. So I'd recommend.
Thank you. Got a small. I'm from London Funders. We're a sort of membership body for funders in the capital. And James, you mentioned it took about 2 years to get community voices and leaders on your sort of funding committees or your boards. And I know first time that funders can move at a kind of glacial pace. But I wondered if maybe you could expand a bit on what that process was like, any sort of lessons, and then if the panel has any sort of broader thoughts on how we can get funders or sort of institutions, Hannah, you mentioned academia as one, how can we get them to move faster and braver and stop just running more research reports?
Could I just add an extra question onto that, because it's very kind of linked. So given the professionalised nature of the charity and funding sector, and all of what you just set out, what you said, how long it's kind of taken, and the fact that leaders just move on, it's transitory, that's the environment that we're in. My question is, you've made loads of progress. What's the mechanisms to make sure that that progress isn't lost? And I don't know if you thought about that, but I'm super interested in that, because it can sort of shift and turn depending on who's in power.
That rings very true. In terms of the learnings from the process, so I say it's been probably a 2 year of action, if you like, and then it's been 5 years of actually learning, understanding, realising where our enormous gaps are. And if I bring it back to something Erel mentioned earlier, that it was making me cringe a little bit, because it was like a tick box of everything we do. So we centre lived experience, we're buying for people, we want to be more participatory. We say all of these things. And it's only in the last 2 years that we've actually been able to meaningfully action some of that. And the way that's going to come about is that it's taken a lot of engagement with senior stakeholders and leadership within the organisation. First of all, your board have to be committed to it. They have to want it. And often you'll find that a lot of boards at institutions aren't really representative of the communities that they are seeking to serve, which fundamentally is a really big problem across the sector. It's all well-meaning, but it does create a disconnect. And so I think once you've got kind of board and senior stakeholder buy-in, there is then a long process of the process itself needs to be participatory, and that it's kind of layers upon layers of. And when you consider an institution like ours is 500 years old, you're introducing, pretty sensible ideas, but they feel like revolutionary to a lot of people in the building. So it has to go kind of very slowly. Everybody has to understand everything and every step you're taking. But on the other side of that, if you're practically going to bring members of the community into an institution, the level of care and consideration that you need to provide to ensure that that is a safe space and a safe environment for people to be in. That in itself is an enormous amount of work, and we have created kind of baseline assessments of every single bit of our funding process, of every single bit of the culture of kind of our meetings and our committees and our boards, and we don't know how that's going to go. We're only just kind of going out to recruit at the moment, and there's going to be a very thorough onboarding process that's going to go along with that. But as I think that my colleagues here have spoken about, these systems aren't built for the communities that they're seeking to serve. So that in itself is quite polarising, and that's going to take a lot of care and understanding and patience on all sides, I think. And in terms of learning and evaluation, just to touch on that, we haven't got that far. If I'm to the point that we know exactly the sort of questions that we're our hypothesis, I guess, is that this is going to and I almost don't want to treat it as a test in a way. It's just fundamentally the right thing to do. So it's more about how can we make this as good as it can be. If we were putting kind of that kind of framing around it, it would be is this helping to make us make better and more informed decisions that are more in line with what people on the ground want us to be doing? And does this mean that we are far more accountable, which we always should be? So, but we haven't really thought through what a thorough evaluation of that is going to look like just yet.
I'm thinking things, but I don't know if I should say.
You should say. Full disclosure, Erel used to work in Council of House, so she's been inside, she knows.
That whole description is so frustrating. I remember what it was like, but the thing is, we're forced to wait for people who are not connected to our lives the way we live to come to an understanding of it, and then to decide to do these things that we've been saying you should have done the last 100 years. So there's a fundamental problem with who has control over the resource, and that just needs to move. I don't even need funders to get it. They just need to give me the money.
I agree.
But we're not at that stage yet. But the only reason I'm saying it is because I would hate funders or other institutions to go away and think, we've just got to try harder and do more evaluations and make sure all our no, just hand over the power, hand over the money. We already know these things. It's not revolutionary to us. We know it, we can do it. There's more issues around trust and risk and power, and we have to talk about that as well. So, yeah.
Can I pick up on the point there, actually, Erel? I was just about to sort of set you up because I know you have history.
That's
I was going to actually look to you because you made a comment about earlier saying that you didn't need people to share your pain. You just actually wanted the power to be shared, and that community wisdom is worth consultancy rates. So, to your point, James, why are we not able to pay community to conduct the needs analysis rather than waiting for the board to come to whatever conclusion over a very long period of time? Why can't we mobilise the community to conduct the needs analysis and be paid consultancy rates for
£1,000 a day?
Why is that difficult? Why is that not possible? Why is that not on the table?
Can you say a bit more what you mean by needs analysis, so I can understand?
You're talking about evaluating the situation and then deciding what's needed, what change is needed, how to affect it. But you might get to the answers more quickly by going to the source. So are we not able to, instead of waiting for the board to deliberate or whatever body it is, are we not able to go straight to community and say, look, this needs to be addressed. Who's available to come and sit around the table to address this? And it's a proper responsibility, therefore it is remunerated accordingly?
So,
It's about trust. It's about what Erel is saying. It's about trust. It's about
I agree. And
releasing the power.
I guess just on the point of remuneration, like that, I would feel very comfortable with. We've recognised that for quite a long time, and that if you need to pay like proportionate day rates it's not quite £1,000, but it's getting there for community expertise, because that's what it is. And so, in any time that we're doing any kind of community advisory group, or if we're bringing community voice in, that is well remunerated. That would be the same for people that we recruit to boards. I guess the other, actually, I agree with Rob, by the way. The other, like, because the other perverse dynamic that ends up being in place is that, and this happens, I've seen this play out in quite a few institutions, that there is a level of people feel responsible and accountable for doing their jobs, and they don't want to overburden kind of communities with when they've got responsibility to look after something. And that, again, is well-meaning, but it's because the wrong people are in the jobs, and I've probably put myself in that bracket. So it's kind of, there is a big shift needed if we're going to do something like this. And I think that's where, like, Erel's thinking of the current system. It's very difficult. That's going to take so long to change that you're better off building your own. Can't guarantee we'll fund it.
First of all, I want to say thank you for the talks. It's been really interesting as somebody who's new to peer research. I wanted to ask, in my experience, when grassroots organisations get funding, it's always the most popular in the borough or the largest in the borough. How do we ensure that the smaller, more specialised grassroots organisations get the funding to do the most impact and to get exposure that they need to grow bigger?
I feel like I've spoken about this, so So, I'll go first very quickly. I agree that's a problem, and funders need to be more intentional about trying to find diverse sets of organisations at different scales to fund and support. I actually think it comes back to the previous conversation. Like, if you just devolved all that funding and put it into the hands of the community, they would sort that out for you really quickly. And that's what's happened with the Think Fund, for example. There is a very even split of some small organisations, some medium, some large, all getting funded across the board. The difficulty comes when organisations like mine put our fancy strategies all over it, and then say, well, we've got to work with very specific organisations doing very specific things, and then only work with a handful of organisations. So it's not really an answer, but I would say the previous conversation is probably the answer to that.
And something, so in House of Prosper we do re-grant as well, and so we've had about just under £1 million to give to the organisation to work with us. I think we have funded organisations that, like you might consider, are popular, but we've tried to basically work in a way where we're thinking about ecosystems, and we're thinking about because an organisation is big and popular isn't necessarily the problem, it's how they operate within the community. Some of the organisations that we have funded have been really intentional about making sure the end of partners that they have are some like really tiny organisations, because they know they've got the platform, so they've used that to grow others. And so like it's much more about like the principles and the kind of the generosity and the idea that we can operate together. It doesn't have to be this scarcity mindset, deficit mindset, this competition that we get put in by funders, but not to think actually it's possible for us all to win, maybe not exactly at the same scale, but if we think much more about, I don't like the word collaboration, you're quite right, but the ecosystem thinking, and we're trying to also get funders to think like that as well. Like if you do this collective, you're not just doing this collective, but you're doing more, and it's going to seep into more organisations, and you can see, look at the way these organisations operate in community and what people say about them.
Hello. I've kind of forgotten my question here in a silent rage, but
Speak up a bit. We want to hear your
Lambeth
story.
Council here. I don't want to hear that bit, but fundamentally, I've been doing this for a really, really long time, and I'm really, really tired now, and nothing's changed. But in these kind of conversations, I'm spending a lot of time these days looking at the power dynamics underneath them. And obviously the answer to all of the questions is revolution. Because at no point are these turkeys going to vote for Christmas. So this idea of building, powerful partnerships where the voice of the community is heard, which is of course, I'm not sure he's here, of course our absolute ideal, our driving ambitions, but we are so hampered by a couple of things. One is politics, where every 4 years our administration changes. And just when we thought we had a strategic direction, they go, no, we're going to do something different now. Resources accompanying that as well. And we can adhere to all of these finer principles of supporting engagement as we all know it ought to be. And James, I entirely recognise your officer concerns there. However, I think that's all I've got to say, really. But what's the answer? We're looking for the answer. Still looking for the answer. I think probably the bit that I am made more aware of as the inside rather than the outside is I do hear a lot of voices. I hear a lot of communities, and one of the concerns for something like a council or a funder is that all of those voices aren't saying the same thing. And we're going to have to go out and make a decision based on some really loud voices that we've heard, who may not actually be majority, but they're loud, and keep that appearance of listening and acting on those voices. So it's a huge, our world is all huge tension. So any advice, Rosemary, on how to resolve those is helpful. And James, I don't think you're the wrong person. I think you're in the wrong job. That's what it boils down to. We are being described as, engagement practitioners, for example, but then actually managed to do something completely different that doesn't look like what it says on the tin. So awareness, revolution, and everybody should do one term as an elected local representative, just to see what it's like on the inside. Honestly, thank you. Thank you.
I would say thank you for your service. Thank you for still showing up even after all these years and still going. It shows you obviously care quite a lot about trying to get this right.
You're getting on really clear levels. You're getting on really. There are people like Lankelly Chase who are just doing it really, really differently. But why are they viewed as outliers, not path leaders?
So just the benefit, I guess, for everyone, Lankelly Chase was spending down their endowment.
On what though? That's my question.
That I don't know.
Yeah, nobody knows. Can you speak to the decolonised funding aspect of
Oh gosh. Sorry, I thought that was an academic question. Go on about one day.
Is that not relevant to?
I mean, I guess it's probably directed, but yeah. It's certainly relevant, and it's certainly relevant to us. But for those that aren't aware, we're an endowed foundation, and our endowment also, our endowment links back to some of the proceeds of the transatlantic slave trade back many years back, and it's hugely relevant. I think that the message and the signal, and I hold both perspectives on it actually, but there's an element of me that thinks it's partly giving up, in the sense that it no longer feels like it can tackle the current system, therefore it's spending down into where I'm not sure, but it's trying to then make a statement in doing so, whereas other funders who have made different decisions are staying in the system to try and change it from within. I think there's validity in both, and I think it's exciting that someone has not gone first, because many others have come before, and there's been recent research that the motivation for spending down varies from across different foundations. But Lankelly's kind of, certainly from my understanding of it, is that the system's so broken that they can't, they don't want to invest in it anymore, and so they're looking to spend down in whatever way they can that creates new systems, I guess. But I don't know enough detail about what their plans are to speak more on that. Have you not? You must have hit them up funding.
I've spoken to them before, and I'm not sure we can get money out of them. And the only thing I would say is that I feel for them a bit, because there's all kinds of stories, like I said, the CEO was on drugs and all kinds of things. Because I feel like they've been like really demonised for trying to do something different. I think they've admitted that they're not sure exactly what the right thing to do is, but no one else knows. So I mean, you know, at least the principles that they're trying to operate by, like, you know, we can at least say, okay, give it a try, and also them doing what they've done, and so publicly, I think has helped some maybe other foundations and trusts to rethink as well. And so there were a few who were maybe not quite spending all the way down, but they're trying to move differently. So I think it's valuable in that respect. But ultimately, I think your point, you're right, is that turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and that's why the things don't change. I remember we tried to have a conversation about, you know, endowments and pound, all of that when I was back in crisis and policies, and it didn't go that well. You know, very senior people were not willing to even have the conversation. I don't know if that's changed now, but it's difficult. How doesn't shift easily.
We have had the conversation now, and our board and leadership have decided to stick with perpetuity for now. So
stick with the states.
Yeah, and that's the real problem. I think even in academia, and to your point about being in the wrong job, it's a question that I ask myself. You know, doing the kind of work that I want to do with communities, can it work within the university? You know, is it something that has a place there, or is it just doing the performative tick boxing stuff? The same with DEI, you know, diversity, equity and inclusion, and following kind of BLM, there's all these, and it's funders that are primarily pushing, you know, participatory research on the researchers, so they'll come to me to be trained, but you can see that they don't genuinely believe in it, they don't want to do it, and they're like, right, I've got to do this because I'm applying for funding for this, so can you help me? And I'm like, well, let me read your proposal, and I read it, and it's extractive, it's exploitative, it needs a different approach. There's a lot of research approaches. Use the traditional approach. Don't try and make it or call it what it isn't, because then you're exploiting those communities. So, but there's all these kind of, you know, these systems, like we said, they're colonial institutions, you know, the university, or universities, and they weren't built for people like me and, you know, and others, and our community. So it becomes very difficult when they try to parachute it in, like I said, and say, right, we want to share power. Well, do you really? Do you really know what that means? It's not just about, right, we can all sit down together and decide what topic we're going to do. You know, it's not going to be the hijab. That's not what it is. It's much more than that, right? And it's about, I mean, before we learn and how to do this, we need to do some unlearning, and then we need to have the really uncomfortable conversations. We need to discuss things beyond like the things that are okay that they're happy to discuss, like gender. We need to discuss race. We need to discuss, you know, the history of our society and what this institution that we're sitting in was built on. We need to discuss what communities really want, and reparations, for example. Those are conversations that they just don't want to engage in. So when it comes to real power sharing, I think there's a ceiling, you know, where they want to do things, but once it becomes a threat to the status quo and real power sharing, it's like, oh no. And it's the same with, you know, these terms that they use, these radical social justice rooted terms like decolonisation. That's everywhere in the institution now. Decolonise the curriculum. So it's like, rather than changing these systems, really interrogating it and the practices and who it harms and who it benefits and all of that, it's let's add some black authors to the reading lists, or let's add some people of colour to the, let's hire, you know, and psychology is very white, so it's, you know, you see it everywhere. Where, and so yeah, I'm just, there's a lot that you brought up that's got me thinking, and you know, these are questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're trying to promote these things. Do they really work in those systems, or do they need new systems and new organisations, and to really push what they're about and what they aim to achieve? So yeah, I just think I rambled, but hopefully.
Oh, sure, I'll be quick. I'm sorry. Hi, thank you for everything the three of you said. It's been phenomenal, and it's taught me so much. So I'm trying to get into the area of like economics. I did economics as like my undergrad and my postgrad degree, and sometimes I kind of like go online and read papers and see what the latest thoughts are. And over the last, I would say, year, one thing that's kind of scared me and I haven't really been able to put into words is how I feel like the subject is kind of going way beyond where it should. Like I read a paper on the economics of emotion and the economics of grief. And initially you go, oh, okay, maybe this is a bit interesting. And then you see people kind of talk about their emotional experiences and then try and chuck some maths behind it. You know, super weird and a bit abstract. And it kind of made me, you know, look into this idea of economic imperialism, the idea that there's so many aspects of your life that don't have a monetary value. They're just important to you and important to your community. And they're kind of just being turned into these abstract things that people who have no clue, you know, about how it works or how, you know, the experiences don't inform what they're writing about. And it's kind of starting, I feel like, to infect might be a strong term, but it's starting to feel like even in the, you know, I guess the charity sector and in the, you know, in academia and everywhere else, it seems like there's a big push to try and make things that as beautiful as community empowerment just become another thing on a spreadsheet. I was just wondering how the three of you see trying to push back against that and trying to make your communities not fall into the same line of thinking, because it's so easy to justify using a bunch of fancy terms or a bunch of fancy maths why things can't be done, why the community can't receive these things. So yeah, how do we kind of push back on that as a community and learn how to kind of overcome that sort of thinking or stop it from seeping into what we're doing? Does that make sense?
Like over-intellectualizing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
To try and get.
I can give it a go. It's a great point. And if I was pessimistic, it's because this is how we understand the world in a capitalist system. Everything comes down to numbers. It's the same reason why on a global level we still look at GDP as a measure of a country's progress, with no bearing on whether or not people are actually living better or healthier lives. So that economic kind of capitalist model drives a real reductionist approach where everything becomes about how much money you can make and externalises everything else to a point where you've got issues of social, racial justice, climate change, all the rest of it just kind of bubbling up. The way, and this comes back to I think Erel's point, the way you get away from that by creating new systems that matter. You know, you've got things like the social progress imperative, which is really good work about how to model a country's progress based on things that have nothing to do with money. You've got things like donative economics that are kind of trying to reimagine the way that we might talk about progress in a more healthy and rounded perspective. And I think they're the kind of shoots of hope that you need to centre and ground in your work, so you can almost detach yourself from this kind of reductionist view that is a race to the bottom essentially. But those shoots of kind of optimism are everywhere. There's lots of them. There's lots of people doing really inspiring and amazing work. And no least the two people next to me. So.
Oh. That's a really good point. Question that you asked as well, and I think from sort of the academic context, you know, young people like yourself questioning things, questioning what they're reading, approaching it with that real critical lens is super important. So you're doing the work as well, and not just, you know, accepting what we're taught. We kind of, the schooling system, it's that banking model of education, right, where it's just students are passive vessels and they just receive knowledge and they don't have anything to add. But has anybody heard of pedagogy of the oppressed? Yeah?
Surely
right?
everyone.
Everyone, right? Yeah, Paulo Freire, right? Love his work. So I think one of the things that we need to do, and this might speak to somebody's point earlier, is raise our consciousness. So when we're teaching students, when we're, you know, in community, when we're collaborating, is to raise consciousness by talking about these things and hopefully achieve critical consciousness, right? So there's like, the majority of society isn't aware that they have any power, or the systems that, you know, don't change or have this impact on us. And then it's like raising consciousness so that people start to become aware that they do have power. And then it's raising it to realise that we have collective power, we have political power and stuff. So it's realising our agency, realising that when we're stronger together. I think that's one of the ways that I kind of think we can push back.
Yeah, just a small point. One thing that's really helped me, like we worked with an organisation called Decolonising Economics, but for them it's not just a buzzword, but I think what was really useful in working with them is that they helped us to, I guess, also reclaim our histories and ancient wisdom. So although there are new shoots of hope, which is good, which we can draw on, but we've also got our ancestry and the ways in which our people used to do things, which actually is much better. So drawing on that and learning about it, I think is also really powerful.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
There's just a quick point I wanted to ask. It really was just to ask you mentioned about the transatlantic slave trade. I'm a reparations activist and have been for many years. So just wondered what that's about, what you meant.
So, I mean, in part, that is where some of the money that our endowment is reliant on has come from. And that's also, and this is how it becomes very not complex, but that's where the money came from to build St Thomas's Hospital, Garden Hospital, for example. And for us, we've kind of, this is a very institutional response, and I'm going to check myself a little bit here, but we've done the usual thing, done a report on our history and tried to understand our past a bit more to help us inform what we should do in the future. And so now with our philanthropy work, like we centre racial justice as a central part. We look to support black-led organisations, particularly in Lambeth and Southwark, as much as we can. And so it's not reparations. It doesn't go anywhere near as far as that. But it's in the confines that we've got. It's what we can do, and when I say we, I mean the staff body that are working with the organisation. So the strategy is set up to be able to enable that. But the bigger question is what's happening with all that money in the bank. That's the one that Erel was mentioning earlier, the one that we, as the leadership, have decided that they want to remain in perpetuity. And the report is actually quite interesting. It's run by 10 Years Time. I don't know if you've come across them before, Derek Borble, but it's on our website. It's open to the public. So if you are interested in learning more, I'm happy to find it for you so you can understand. But thank you for the question. It's something we should be talking about more.
Should we take one?
Yeah, sorry, thank you very much. This was really interesting. This is probably more specifically for Hannah, but I'm just welcome to anyone's opinion is a great So I started my PhD 2 months ago, and something I'm really interested in is participatory action research. And it's kind of where my passion and like my own personal interests lie. But after looking into it and like coming to this, I'm now having this kind of dilemma of, especially specifically because my PhD is funded, is kind of like, how do you do this participatory action research and do it properly within the limits of the PhD and the funding? So like, for example, I really love what you said about you work with your research group to like come up with the questions. Like, and I think that's really important. That's something I would love to do. But literally, as a practical example, I have to submit my research proposal by May, June time, but I don't do any field work until, say, September, October time. So I have to come to them with a full-fledged proposal that I've written on my own before I can even go and speak to anyone else. So it's just, I don't know how to do that, or like, is this even possible? Then the same, what you were speaking about the long-term impacts and like, what's the plan with this research? I feel a bit constrained within the PhD is that I don't really know what the long-term plan is with the research, or like it sort of rests on my own abilities, if that makes sense. So yeah, just any advice on that would be great. Thanks.
So I think this is a dilemma that anybody that does a PhD and uses PAR or participatory approaches will stumble upon, and there's not sort of institutional guidance. It's really lacking in this area of how to navigate both, you know, wanting to do, because a PhD is a very individual task, right? And then PAR is a very community-based, you know, task. And so how do you do the two? How do you combine it? And I think I've got a great paper for you to read if you want to write it down. It's called Doing PAR and Doing a PhD, and it's by Clocker, so Klocker, 2013, I believe. And that really helped me because they were writing about how they navigated this. There's also my paper, if you want to read it. I published about how I navigated this exact kind of these issues, and it's called You Need to Let Go of Control. And then it's, my name, I think it came out last year, 2024. So I talk about, thank you. I talk about some of the limitations, some of the institutional problems. I kind of slate my institution as well in there. But it's a really good point. I think, because of the limits and the rigidity of the institution in which there are all these legal processes, the ethics boards, you need to get ethics approval before you can recruit. And in order to get ethics approval, you need to have a topic, you need to have a proposal and an outline. But then when you start doing PAR, ideally it's a process where, from the design stage, it's done together. You come up with the questions together, you design it together. So how do you do that? So I think it's like there's a part A and part B. So you just do the part A where you create the proposal based on the funding, whatever that was the outline of whatever your project is supposed to be looking at sort of more broadly, and include these are the kinds of methods that we will use, and make it a range so that you're not limited and you're not stuck. So we might use visual methods, we might use these participatory approaches, we might use interviewing, focus groups, we might do this and that. So I think if you cover as much space as you can, then once you've got ethical approval and then the group decides, okay, we want to actually do focus groups, not interviews, or we want to do visual methods, not this, then you've already put that in your ethics application and so you've covered yourself. So make it broad and make that clear and include citations, cite papers where they've successfully used PAR in a PhD. And that is, by design, it's like this, where it's a lot of unknowns, and that's because it's by its very nature, it's decided together with the communities that you work with, and so you haven't recruited them, and so you can't know the eventual direction. So it's a process that unfolds organically. I think make that clear as much as you can. Add citations, they love citations and evidence, add all of that. And then when you go to the community, you can let them know and be just honest and say, this is kind of the proposal because I had to submit for ethics. I've got an outline. We can scrap that. We can go in, whichever direction we want. This is a democratic process. We'll start together. We can brainstorm and so on. So sorry, long answer, but is that helpful?
That's really, really helpful.
Oh, amazing. Good. Okay. Yeah, excellent.
Can I say a quick, as a person who works for two organisations who are think tanks and does, I guess, community grassroots work with, who has had so many PhD students want to come and work with us. And just from that perspective, I would say what I often look at is, like, why do you want to do this? Like, if this is not your community, why are you coming? Like, you might be well intended and really nice, but why are you here for? Like, you're actually just reinforcing like the same power dynamics. And that's one. And I think two, also, so not you obviously, but I'm just saying this is me when I'm looking at the applications. I'm thinking that you're not coming here to do something that effectively just furthers yourself in your own career, and you're just, this is a point of interest at some part in your journey. Like, if I can't see that really, like, say like with in your situation, you're clearly from that community and it's something that you were doing, to kind of in service to your community, and I can understand that. But if not, I would just say you may need to be really reflective, and it might be a bit painful, around why it is you want to do it, and who the benefit will really be for.
Yeah. Or like questioning those kind of things, like, am I the best person to do this research? And I think that to take it even further, even if you're from that community, it's a question to ask yourself, am I the best person to be doing this? Do you know what I mean? So I think definitely applies.
Sarah, I feel like you should say something. We've got Sarah Howard who's like the veteran in this stuff. Yeah.
Your voice
Yeah.
is
Sorry.
Every time I come, I'm always like, I'm so tight. So I'm someone who works inside an institution. I'm always so.
Part of me doesn't want to let go of trying to change that institution, because I just feel like we should be more democratic. But then every time I hear you speak, I think maybe it's just not possible, which is why my question was around, like, what are the, because it never does feel like it kind of changes. And part of that I do think is because it's a professionalised funder charity sector where people come and go. So you might be able to make progress, and it does really feel like you are, and it looks amazing from the outside. But my question is, how do you make that stick beyond the current leadership that you've got? What's the role of boards, I guess, on that? You talked about getting the boards on board with it, but there's something around this stuff coming and going, and that's the reason why it doesn't kind of stick, because essentially it comes down to the individuals who are running those organisations of whether it goes forward or not. So I don't have the answer. Each time I come and listen to Erel, I'm always thinking, oh God, is it even possible? Do we even, like, what's the role of entrepreneurs trying to shift things within their institutions, I guess? Do we get out because it's just actually everything we do is never good enough? Or do we carry on trying to shift it, or trying to get the money where it needs to be? Like, what is our role, right? It's my question.
That's a good question. I think on that, how do you make it stick? We are 2 years into, so we have a change of leadership at 3 different levels within the organisation, all bringing new ideas, new ways of wanting to do things. But one thing that gives me hope is that work that was started that predated all of them is the work that is now influencing what they now do. And I don't know if it's good for us to say, I'd be curious for people's thoughts who have worked with us, or whether they would consider us a progressive funder, but it feels like we're more open to change than some might, and it has stuck in this context, but it's very difficult to say if there is a new leadership change, what could happen. I also think there's massive egos involved in this, both from an organisational perspective and an individual one. And that's to your point about professionalisation of it. It's kind of wrapped up in the self rather than in what is best for people. And that that comes back to the board question of how representative is it, and how close is it to the communities it is supposed to serve. Yeah.
Speaking to limitations, charitable organisations and funding organisations are deeply hierarchical because they've got a leadership. They're not member-led. You know, we did used to have a lot of member-led, kind of civil society was more made up of member-led organisations, so there was that accountability there. But it's essentially what we're trying to do is incorporate participatory democracy approaches, because it's shared decision making within institutions that don't operate in that way, not even with their staff, right? So it's, in my mind, I'm like, oh God, yeah, is this actually possible? And, you know, it's always going to be like massively limited and therefore always massively dependent on who's leading at the time of how much they believe in this project. It literally comes down to that.
It's like raising consciousness within the academic context, like teaching students, passing on, you know, that knowledge about that they have power and that they need to mobilise and, you know, use that collective power and stuff. I think that a lot of it will be with a new generation. I'm putting a lot of hope in you guys.
Thank you to the panel. Thank you to the audience. Honestly, you never disappoint. Those of you that are returning and the newcomers as well, you never disappoint. It really has been very valuable, and we genuinely appreciate your presence. So please give yourselves a round of applause.